And, because everyone is on a path of their health journey, and we are these live clinical experiments, pretty much walking around to find out what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And one of the things that really caught me, because you had it right at the beginning, that you talk about daily obstacles. We have daily obstacles that can have a significant impact in how we live in flow of how, and when we talk about flow, it's just being able to move through life with ease.
Mhm.
And I would love for you to expand a little bit more on some of how these daily obstacles really do have that impact.
Yeah, I find that it's really easy for today to be consistently distracted and to stutter step our way through our days. And so, in my own health journey, I'm trying to figure out how I can live with more flow because I spent years in my head, right? The average person has about 60,000 thoughts per day. And so it's easy to get kind of stuck up there and not live a flow like experience where you're just, in the present moment. And one of the things that I try to help people do is to be one introspective about what they can improve upon, right? Very deeply introspective about their subconscious programming or their current paradigm, because it's easy to think, this is how I think, this is how the world is, and you need to expand it. And then another way of trying to help people to get through their day with more happiness, joy, flow, ease is I try to help people to decomplicate it. And one of the ways I do that is I try to help people think of what is a domino in your life. Oftentimes we have, if you knock over this one domino, other health dominoes are going to fall because otherwise it can be overwhelming. You think about, I have to ensure my hydration and my supplements and my eating and my sleep hygiene and how I interact and all these things, and people get overwhelmed by it. But sometimes there might be one or two things that you can do that actually knocks over those health dominoes. So for me, it's if I get up before my children and I exercise, then I know I am going to be more present when they wake up. I am more likely to, eat better that day, to be more productive. I know that one domino starting my day like that has an impact for the next, 23 hours of that day.
And one of the things you talk about is that the way to your path, the way that you were going, was a very painful journey. And we often think, we're doing okay, it's working for us, and then all of a sudden, wham, we're hit with something that takes us off track. Like you said, that domino, it just takes one thing. I would love for you to share with us a little bit of, because I know you've had more than one.
I have.
Just share with us how, you may have thought it was working for you and then you learned that it wasn't.
Well, the way I had existed for many, many years, right? We all have ways of existing in this world, and some are mostly positive, and for other people, it's a coping mechanism. And I didn't realize until later into my adulthood that one of my coping mechanisms was I really hid my emotions and I masked everything with overwork. And that's how I existed in this world. That's how I felt value and worth. And it through the writing of this book, that's where I began to start to show some of those vulnerabilities that I have that I masked for years. I masked, whether it's the loss of somebody or disappointment. I masked everything. I put a smile on my face. I continued on. And when life got really difficult, I just delved more into work because that gave me a sense of accomplishment and who I am. And so for me, I've had to take a very difficult journey, but it's been beautiful of trying to swing the pendulum the opposite way now. Whereas I used to hide my vulnerabilities and my emotions, and it was the keep calm and carry on mentality. And now I realize that, as you've read, Debra, in my book, I've had different physical and mental health breakdowns. And it wasn't until I made a paradigm shift and I had to do two things. One, I had to change the way I viewed the word productivity, and I had to show emotion, so show vulnerability. And so now swinging the pendulum the other way is whenever I'm speaking at conferences or with students or with groups of people or like yourselves on podcasts, I want people to use me as a cautionary tale. I talk about how my emotional difficulties and my vulnerabilities, and I try to show people that side of me now so that more people are willing to do that so they don't get into the desperate situation that I found myself in.
So do you think it's cultural conditioning, like for men, that might occur for men more so than women? Because I do believe it exists for women as well. But, traditionally we don't think of men sharing vulnerability. So I'd be curious as to what you found in your research.
Yeah, there is definitely a correlation there between genders and the amount of people that will even, go seek out therapy, that will go get help, that will even talk to their friends or their family members about things that might be bothering them. So there definitely is that aspect to it. It's also a cultural thing in some ways because by and large, our culture celebrates breadth rather than depth. And so oftentimes, male, female, it is it is hard because we find ourselves so busy that it's hard to actually sit down, look at somebody, and go to the depth of where the healing needs to go. And because we're so expedited and we're so busy and we're so over programmed. And so that's why one of the big things that I talk about in the book is because it's something I chased for years. I chased more energy. I always wanted to have more energy. And in doing so, increasing, because a lot of people think they have a time management problem. If I can just solve my time management problem, then, I can do all of these other things. But a lot of people have an energy management problem. Is if you can get your vital, clean energy where it needs to be, your tasks, chores, work take less time. And then you have more time where we can sit, where you and me, Deborah, we can sit together and we can go deep, where I can do that with my wife or a therapist. And that's really important.
Yeah. Because I find sometimes when you have conversations with people, you can tell when someone's staying on the superficial side, and not superficial in that it's a bad thing. Is I think that they're scared to go to that depth. They're scared to have that vulnerability for fear, of course, of being judged would be the first thing I would think of, thinking that they're the only one that's going through these
Mm-hmm.
experiences. And I would like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I remember the first few times that I did it, how scared I was. I remember, so the first time that I went to speak to, it was a corporate organization in downtown Toronto, and I brought my wife with me that day, and I was like, okay, I've got this book coming out that where I'm exposed. This is where I started working on my vulnerabilities. I need to write it out. That's stage one for me, and then I needed to talk about it. And I remember the first time that I did that, I was very, very nervous. I'm used to speaking in front of people, but about not me, And so now I needed to talk about me and take the mask off. And I did that, and the beautiful reception it that I got from people. And then it almost gave people the opportunity to come up to me afterwards and talk about what they're going through or similarities or just to talk. And from there it just kind of grew, and this is fairly recently. This is in the last 18 months when I've started doing that. And now I have zero fear of talking about vulnerabilities. I welcome it because I used to fear judgment from people, that if I talk about this, then they're going to judge me or whatever it might be. And now I don't have that, because I realize that the benefit far outweighs any cost, and it's healing for me. And when you talk about personal stories with people, you can see it in their eyes when people click on and they're really paying attention. And they know when somebody's being true and empathetic and real. And that's sometimes, to your point, where people talk a lot, superficial, is
Mm.
you can kind of tune in and tune out when you're having a conversation that's superficial. But when somebody looks you in the eye and starts talking about something real, that's really the juice in life. That's where you get to know somebody's heart and soul, and what made them who they are.
That's amazing. I can imagine the freedom you felt. And at the same time, you created that psychological space safe space for people to come and share what they're going through, because it probably took a lot for them to come up to start sharing those things with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, humbling in a lot of ways because people would come up and talk to me about very serious stuff that might have happened to a family member or what they're going through. And, sometimes they want help me pointing them in the right direction, if I'm giving mental health first aid seminars, or it's advice on nutrition or supplements or spiritual practices. And, if I don't have the answer, then I work with them and we find the answer together. But it is a beautiful experience because when that happens, I feel different at the end of the day. I feel that it's almost like I connected with the earth more. I know that sounds odd, but we live in boxes, right? We get up in our box house, we get in our car, we go to our box work, and then we get home and we turn on our television. And so it changes it because now I felt something real. And I search that each day now, and you got to be careful. My pastor once told me is be careful. You can't share with everybody, the depths of your being, because you look at you like rings in your life, and the people that are closest to you, you want to have that open relationship. The people on the outskirts, you have relations with them, but you just have to know who you want to share with and who you can and who needs it, because otherwise it can be actually physically exhausting if you are just talking to everybody about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So part of the book is about energy management, understanding emotions, and that emotions actually can cause physical drain. And so just like when you exercise your muscles, there's a recovery period. The same thing when you exercise your emotions, particularly people like myself who spend years hiding it. When I let it out, I'm tired the next day.
There's a section in your book that you talk about being broken. And I know that people will resist going to therapy. They will, say, oh, I'm not broken. And I would love for you just to give your perspective on that word broken when it comes to our mental and physical health, and, maybe open or kind of pull the curtains per se as to how people can have a shift in their perspective of what that brokenness is and how you can move forward with a lot of grace.
Yeah, so the word broken I use because I broke down, and when I think of the word broke, I think about something isn't working as it's intended. Whether it's something in your physiology, perhaps your heart is not that people are broken, but an aspect of ourselves need repair, right? Just like a car, right? If something goes wrong with the car, you don't throw it out, you try to fix it. And so for people, sometimes it could be mental, could be physical, could be spiritual, and it could just be something that needs a little bit of mending. Or for some people that have had decades of neglect of their body and their emotions, they may need a full physical overhaul. But for myself, being broken, in the book I outlined 3 different times. I kind of broke down. It took me a long time. I have to say, to learn my lesson and to give up my addiction to overwork. And the last, breakdown I had was my brain actually started to operate different. I and I want to caution the people that are listening, because my third breakdown happened when I was in one of the most happiest times of my life. I got my job that I love. I was doing some stuff on the side. I was engaged to my now beautiful wife. And then that's when, I won't go into too much detail, but out of the blue, seemingly out of the blue, because I wasn't looking at the warning signs, I developed a mental health problem of which there is no cure, right? I developed a depersonalization disorder, which I now look at as a blessing in my life, but it's something that if I don't manage my physical, emotional, spiritual health, then the symptoms of my depersonalization come back. So for me, I look at it like the grace from God. I've got this blessing of this like barometer in my life that when the heat goes up, I feel the symptoms. I need to get back down to what made me the healthiest.
But one of the things that I will share to grab everybody's attention is that you went into a class and you were thinking, how can I articulate to my students that we can't have this class today?
Yeah, that was one of the most, that was the first breakdown. It was in April of 2009. And I was, to give you an example, in that year, I worked at the University of Ottawa 26 hours a week. I taught 8 courses at a place called Algonquin College, and I worked at a personal training business out of a local gym. Uh, so, like you can imagine, that's a lot of work. And then I got up in front of my class on a Thursday afternoon, and all of a sudden, the only way I could think and describe it is that the light switch in my brain had turned off. I actually lost the ability to talk. And here are my students staring at me, waiting for me to start talking and teach them the lesson that day. And I couldn't. I got just enough words out to tell them class was canceled. I walked home in a daze. I called my dad, and the only thing I could tell him was the light switch in my brain just turned off.